Hey, ho, 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 Josh Brown here. Welcome back to another episode of Franchise Euphoria. I am pumped up and excited because today's interview is with Eddie Yoon, and he is just a really insightful guy. Man, is he great to interview. He is the founder of EDDIEWOULDGROW, a think tank and advisory firm on growth strategy. Prior to that, he was a partner at the Cambridge Group, where he worked for 18 years, a strategy consulting firm founded in 1975 that specializes in helping CEOs and senior leadership teams within Fortune 1000 corporations drive growth by understanding how to unlock new sources of consumer demand. In the last 5 years, he's helped double numerous businesses, cable media company, food brand, beverage company, pet food brand, consumer robotics, standby generators from several hundred million to close to $1 billion. He's also an author. He's the author of the acclaimed book, Super Consumers, A Simple, Speedy, and Sustainable Path to Superior Growth, as part of the Harvard Business School Press, 2016. He's also the author of over 40 articles, including Make Your Best Consumers Even Better, that was featured in Harvard Business Review magazine in 2014, and Why It Pays to Be a Category Creator, also in the Harvard Business Review magazine. Eddie's been a keynote speaker in the US, Africa, Australia, Denmark, the UK, and Japan, and I could just go on and on and on. This guy's smart. I'm just going to say it. This guy's a smart dude, and he is a really, really interesting interview. And I think you'll find what we talk about today to be fascinating if you're a company that's looking to grow. If you're a new franchisor, if you're an emerging franchisor, we talk about how you grow your categories, how you avoid the mistakes that so many companies make when they grow and failing to think about the long term, and how you can go about picking your next locations for growth. So without further ado, here's Eddie Yoon. Hey, Eddie, how you doing?
Josh, I'm great. How are you?
Doing fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us today. Obviously, you are the founder of EDDIEWOULDGROW, which is a think tank and advisory firm on growth strategy. And I'm really excited to have you on for this episode because one of the things that I'm really focusing on for this season of the podcast is on growth-minded entrepreneurs that are looking to go the franchise route. And I think you have a particular background and expertise that bodes well with that. And in particular, talking about the companies that have, anywhere from a few locations all the way up to maybe, 7, 8, 10 locations. And now they're trying to merge both business growth and organizational growth. And I got to imagine with your background, you've probably dealt with this a fair amount.
I've seen it from time to time. So hopefully we'll have some good stuff to talk about. Yeah.
You've been a growth strategist for a long period of time. I mean, you've done it for Fortune 1000 companies. You've done it for smaller companies. I'd be curious. We're going to talk about several things during this interview, but what are some of the things that, irrespective of how big you are, you see as challenges for people when they try to grow their business?
Yeah, I think the thing that I've kind of come to realize after about 2 decades of doing growth strategy is that most people have the wrong mindset, regardless of if you're a large company or an up-and-coming one. The wrong mindset about growing a business, in that most people think about it as a competition where it's king of the hill, right? And that, Josh, you have a slice of the pie, and only way for me to win is to take it from you. And what I've actually found is that strategy can work in the short term, but it rarely has long-term success. And that the thing that you really need to do is to have a different mindset, which is one of kind of abundance versus scarcity, which is to say, I think we can grow the category and make the pie bigger. And by doing that, not only will you grow the business for yourself, but kind of all boats rise with the tide. And, a lot of people say, well, why would you do that? What I've discovered in my work with companies, but also the research that I've done with a lot of Nielsen data, is that companies that are able to successfully grow the category, 1% of companies capture 80% of category growth, which is a pretty astounding figure. And so if you can create a new business, a new sector, a new price tier, a new version of what you're offering, that pie growing strategy is actually quite lucrative, and it's actually sustainable for the long term.
Say that one more time. 1% of brands capture 80% of category growth. Can you break that down a little bit?
Sure, sure. So I'll give you an example in the yogurt space. So everybody's heard of Chobani and the success that they had with Greek yogurt. What's interesting is that most of their success has come from growing the category. The category has nearly doubled in a short period of time, in part because they are charging a higher price point, but their emphasis on protein has actually brought new people into the category, right? So yogurt, kind of a more traditionally female-oriented category, but protein kind of invites more men into the space, or it's a different type of snack that you might be competing with. A different example that's a little bit farther afield of this might be video games. And so people might be surprised to know that the number of video gamers globally has nearly tripled in the last 8 years. And it's not like teenage boys, in a dark basement shooting each other playing Call of Duty on an expensive, PlayStation. It's really middle-aged women playing Candy Crush, Words with Friends, and these casual games that are very different in terms of how they engage people. They're on mobile devices, but their pricing structure is also vastly different. And that these companies that are kind of creating new categories and growing their categories, they disproportionately capture the upside that's there without taking it from somebody else. And so the net effect of that happens is that not only are you're as a company, you're able to grow, your competitors don't really know what's going on because it's not coming out of their hide necessarily. And by the time that they figure it out, it's oftentimes too late, and you've got a major, major advantage there.
You use the yogurt and the video game example, but even if you're just an actual restaurant, right? Are you saying that if you're the owner and you're thinking about how do I grow my top line revenue? How do I get more business in the door? Is the idea to come up with some other category that brings in more and different people, or to try to just get more people from the same stuff that you're already serving? I mean, you understand that? Is that two different things?
Well, I actually view it as they are distinct things, Josh, but they're kind of part of the same playbook. And so the question that I always ask people from a strategy perspective, and a lot of what I've been doing now as my own think tank is to just write down and talk about all the lessons that I've learned, so that people, you wouldn't have to hire a consultant to do this, because I just think it's a lot simpler than people realize. But I always ask people, come up with an exercise where whatever space you compete in, if you're a restaurant franchisee and let's say you're in the chicken space, how would I get people to eat twice as much chicken as they do now today? And it seems like a ridiculous question to ask, like, how would you double your category? And that most people aren't able to figure out how to do that. But then I tell you, people, look, there's only 3 ways that people can actually grow a category or double a category. You could increase the number of people who consume or shop or visit your QSR or eat the category. You could increase the number of units per person, or you could increase the price per unit. That makes it a little more tangible, and people are like, oh, okay. Like, not that it's any easier to do, but it's easier to understand what you can do. And a lot of people kind of default to your point, I have some success, let me add a new store, which is, obviously great, but that's kind of just that one lever of increasing the number of people. But you can ask yourself the question, like, what would need to be true for me to double the times that people come into the store, or to consume it twice a day, or what might be there? Or what would need to be true for me to triple my price per unit? Not only triple it in a way where people don't show up to the door, but triple it in a way and people are excited to pay for it. Like, these are the questions that you have to ask that I think are the extreme questions, and you end up with better strategy as a result than just doing the same old, same old.
And so doing those with categories you already have. So it's really kind of, it's thinking outside of the box with the categories that you already have. You're not suggesting, at least it doesn't sound like it. And I think it's a really important point, especially for restaurateurs or restaurant owners, is if you build success because, you serve the greatest chicken sandwich or whatever it is, you figure out a way to add other people, to get people to eat that more.
Yes.
Or to bring more people to eat that, as opposed to say, okay, well, let me start focusing on hamburgers. Exactly. In other words, bringing something else in, just figure out how to broaden the category you're already having success with.
I think that's a really important distinction because when it comes to any kind of restaurants or franchisees or frankly any retail business whatsoever, I always say, what are you famous for? And never forget that's what you are famous for, and that you can never lose your distinction there. So if you're famous for chicken, you don't want to double your units per person by doing burgers, as you said, necessarily. But how can you be, while being true to what you're famous for, double the category that you're in and just be, I think to your point, creative about what it is? And I think like Starbucks is actually, everyone talks about Starbucks, but I think it's this interesting thing of over the years, I can just see them whenever they do a new play. I can see what they're doing through the lens of doubling the category and the levers that are there. And that kind of first and foremost, they double the number of people who are willing to drink coffee just by the sheer fact that they sell a lot more dairy than they actually do coffee, right? And that, it's
do.
kind of
Oh my God. I thought,
isn't that amazing?
Eddie, I thought the same thing. Oh, every time I go there every day, I hate to say it. I mean, I've got an espresso in my house that I love, but for some reason in the mornings, I don't want to wake the kids or whatever. So I go to the Starbucks right close to my house and I get the same latte every day. And I'm like thinking to myself, 3/4 of this thing is milk with like one little shot of espresso. That's what it is.
Well, what the genius of what they've done, or the sinisterness, which you can pick, but like, is they increase the price of the beverage while putting less and less of that expensive coffee into it, right? And it's not only just a genius cost of goods strategy, but I think to your point, the number of people who drink straight up black coffee is actually quite small. The vast majority of people put something into their coffee, be it, a sweetener or dairy of some sort. And that's where they've really kind of expanded the route to. If you go to a Starbucks on an afternoon on a school day, it'll be a zoo packed with teenagers and tweens, and they ain't drinking coffee black, right? They drinking lots of dairy-based beverages or milkshakes equivalent. Like that's kind of what they're doing. So increase the units per person, or, I'm sorry, the number of people, and the units per person is the other one that they've done brilliantly over the time in terms of the cold beverages, the frappuccinos. It's a different day part. It might be hot coffee in the morning, and then a chilled beverage in the afternoon. And some of them are experimenting with wine in the evenings and stuff. And so you get a lot more asset utilization on your square footage that's there. So, you have that aspect of it. And, the obvious one of, there's two interesting things in the price per unit. There's clearly the beverages that they're doing and their Clover and kind of the cold brew, some of the crafty beer type things that they're trying to do. And Howard Schultz has even stepped back to say, I need to figure out how to reinvent a shop that's Starbucks branded that can do a $15 cup of coffee. So they're clearly pushing that angle. But I don't know, Josh, if you talk about your latte in the morning, do you have the Starbucks app?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Okay. So I wrote an article about this in HBR about how in 2013, in one quarter, consumers loaded $1.5 billion onto the app. And
wow,
if you think about what that represents, and especially for a retail or a franchise business, it's a $1.5 billion free working capital loan, because we as consumers, we give them money for a product or a good that we might get down the road for, it's an okay rewards program. I don't think it's fantastic. It's, but it's okay. But like at one point they made about 8% of their profitability off the float on the interest that they made of this free working capital loan that consumers gave to them for beverages they have not yet consumed. And so, you could chalk that up to a higher price per unit. Time value of money is another way of looking at it, right? And
I wonder do you know statistics on how long that, because, I'll load up like, $25 at a time and that'll get me 2.5 drinks basically. No, a little bit more than that, but whatever it is, right? I wonder how long it is between the time that people refill that dollar amount or how long it just sits there. But you know why I do it? And I bet you why so many people do it. And once again, it goes to just pure and utter laziness of, it's just easier for me. I've got my phone sitting on my dash for me to pop open that app and have them scan it than it is for me to reach into my back pocket and get my wallet to get out the cash. It's just easier. It sounds so stupid, but that's really the only reason why I use it. I could care less about the Starbucks rewards and all that other stuff. To your point, I just do it from a convenience perspective.
Well, and one of the axioms I always say is never underestimate the profit potential off the laziness of the American consumer. So, like, I'm with you, man. It's absolutely true, and I think in particular, like, this is the premise of the book I wrote on super consumers is that you have people who love a category, and they might express that love for the category like coffee to a Starbucks. Anything you do to make their lives better, easier, more convenient, it's just gravy. And they are waiting to give you their money because they love the category, be it coffee or chicken or any kind of Mexican food. And it's to your point of, like, it may not seem like a lot to somebody who's an occasional Starbucks user, but for somebody who is there all the time on a frequent basis, and the coffee plays a meaningful role in their lives that goes above and beyond it's a caffeine hit, but it's part of a ritual. It's a part of how they start their day off, and that messing that up a little bit can have a ripple effect that they don't want to have. And so making those people's lives easier to give you money is always a good thing to do.
Yeah, it's a gathering place. I mean, it's so many things. I'm curious. I mean, it always strikes me as interesting, and I think you'd find this interesting too, given the work you do, is that growing a company seems like it would naturally flow from building a company. And what I mean by that is, you go out there, you're an entrepreneur, you built your business. Now you've got a few locations. Now you're thinking about franchising, and you would think that now growing on what you've already built seems like a natural outflow and wouldn't be that challenging. But yet we see over and over again that people who have initial success a lot of times falter at the growth point because they either don't know how to do it. They don't have enough capital. They don't pick the right strategy, so on and so forth. Can you talk a little bit about that?
One of the things that I found is that, like, I'll talk about this a little bit. I hate the word average, in that a lot of people in business use the word average or use metrics that average things. And I just think it's the worst thing, in the sense that the goodness of data is in the weirdness and the anomalies and the spikiness of it. And that's actually how demand, in my experience, works, is that, so you take like a large national franchisee, and they assume that, hey, the average consumer does this, and my strategy needs to be all about peanut buttering my resources evenly just so that I capture everything. And the reality of when you're scaling from a couple of locations to a few more is that it's spiky where the demand is. There's a famous Rome, Georgia, is apparently the highest per capita consumption of Coca-Cola out there, which makes sense. It's near Atlanta and the headquarters.
Sure.
But I have actually found that categories are radically spiky from a per capita standpoint, in that they're spiky in ways that you don't really anticipate or understand, and that don't exist on a map. And so the reason why you have success in a few locations, probably because you were fortunate to start out on a big spike. And the reason why locations number 4, 5, and 6 are not successful is that you put them in a spot where that spike may not exist, even though logically they should, but for whatever reason they didn't. And so the example that I'll give you is like within children's toys. So actually for toddlers. And so one of the fascinating things that we found was that per capita spending on children's toys are just really different across the country, and that some of the trouble that Toys R Us are having now, it actually kind of made sense to me. I'm like, this is not really a national business that should exist everywhere. It should be a very hyper regional business that's very spiky. And the reason why is that certain parents spike towards children's toys, and the correlations are kind of funny, in that what we found were that houses that had basements, high spikiness with children's toys, which kind of makes sense, right? Because you need a place to store all that junk and stuff.
Yeah, more room.
More room for that. And basements tended to correlate with places that tended to be colder weather climates, which again, you spend more time indoors. But the biggest correlation that we found was children's books, which is kind of funny, in that you don't think of books and toys going together. But for toddlers, what ended up happening is the same type of high engagement, gonna get on your hands and knees and snuggle with your toddler behavior that you would do when you're reading a book, because the kid can't read, is the same kind of behavior that happens when you're playing with them with a toddler toy. because they can't really play on their own, or you shouldn't really leave them by themselves. And so the book ended up being a really high predictor of where parents that would actually spend a lot of money on toddler toys. And so once armed with this data, this company was able to actually be very targeted about where they spent their advertising, what retail stores that they really focused on, and whatnot. But like, that's in general, my observation is that, you wish that demand was an even Steven peanut butter all over the place, but it's not. And if you're struggling, it's usually because you made a miscalculation on where the demand actually is.
Do you work with companies on predictive models, to help them? So if they're having success in a few locations, and let's say they identify, here's where we want to grow, putting together predictive models to say, this is what we see in those demographics and that makeup, and that's going to have an impact on your business because of X, Y, and Z. I mean, you do that kind of work?
Absolutely. What's interesting about the predictive modeling bit is that usually when people, you put those words together, predictive model, the next two words that come together is, oh, data scientist, and that's what I need. And it is true that you need somebody who is a quant whiz that can do that, but they oftentimes don't have the skills to actually kind of see the story that's connecting the data in ways that make logical sense. Because I think it's because so if I go back to the super consumer thing that's going on, is that the way that demand spreads in my experience is that you get a couple of super consumers who are nuts about coffee or a category like chicken, as we were talking about before, and they kind of geek out on it. They spend a lot of money. Hence, your first two franchises are successful. And then the what predicates success for them is their ability to convert other people to religion, that this coffee is the greatest thing since sliced bread and you have to do it too. And the way that actually works is you can do it by data, but it's oftentimes not as obvious. And so like, I'll give you another example in the toy space. So American Girl, which is a chapter that I write about in my book, what was fascinating was that they were sending out catalogs. So this is an omni-channel retailer. So they have retail stores, of course, but they send a lot of catalogs, and, they would send it to your house, Josh, and maybe I was your neighbor, and they'd send it to mine, and they would measure ROI, your house alone versus my house. And what ended up happening, what we said was, you kind of have to measure it at the neighborhood or the zip code level, because the easiest way to sell more American Girl toys is to have your daughter, who has a lot of American Girl, play with my daughter, who has very little. And then my daughter comes home and says, Daddy, I want. And that's how demand spreads. And that actually the way that you should be measuring your resource allocation is not by the individual house. And actually, if I had perfect data, it wouldn't even be by the zip code of the neighborhood. I would measure it by the play group, because that's how kids play. And that's when demand formations go. If there wasn't, I'm sure there's a marketing issue with this, but you can't. But if I could get the play group or classrooms, like that would be the ideal marketing list for something like an American Girl thing, right? Because I need to know the consumer, but I need to know the context in which if they are a super consumer, are infecting other people with the same demand that they have there. In the same way that, a couple of guys who are going out for beers, two guys love microbrews and the third one doesn't. Guess what happens? The third one eventually follows along at some point with it. And that's kind of the nature of how demand works.
Is that why you say that every category has untapped growth of 20% or more?
Yes, absolutely. Because it's for you nailed it. There's every super consumer that's out there. There's 2 to 3 people who would like to be like them, but they don't know how. And I remember I was in Copenhagen talking about the book, and it was just funny to think, like, I'm here in the middle of Europe, and there was a journalist that came up to me, was writing about the talk that I was giving, and he said to me just personally, like, what's funny is I just got a motorcycle. Like I had one when I was young. I got married and had kids. My wife said, no more motorcycles. And then now my kids are gone. So he's gotten back into it, and he didn't know which one to get. And so he found a motorcycle super consumer who was like, look, the 2 that you're considering would be disasters for you in the way that you ride and the climate that we're in. Don't do that. This is the 3rd and the 4th one brands that he had never considered beforehand. And he ended up going there and had a much more fun and safer time doing it, versus being kind of stuck in the, I want to do it, but I'm like 30 years out of practice. And, if I don't do it right, my wife's going to get all over me with this. That there's a lot of this kind of pent up demand of people who would like to be, I would love to try that restaurant, but I don't really know how to order and I don't want to look stupid. So I got to find somebody who's really into that. And if they can take me, all the better there. That's kind of the way this latent demand of potential supers are kind of lurking out there. And they just need to be awakened and unlocked, ideally with other supers.
So if you're, let's say you'd mentioned the restaurant, and we've talked about it a little bit. You're a restaurant. You've got a few locations. You might naturally think, I want to expand our growth or get more people in the door. Let's go out to the 1 mile radius around this restaurant, or the 2 to 3 mile radius, and just start handing out flyers, doing whatever it is, or blast people with social media, or whatever the case may be. It's kind of interesting hearing you talk, because you might suggest doing something a little bit different than that, right? I mean, you might say, hey, I know the statistics might say that people come to these restaurants mostly from within a certain mile radius, but perhaps we could get other people who become raving fans who are just outside of that. And then maybe you tap into a whole new consumer base of, even if it's only 10% of those people, if it's a large enough base, now you've just added a significant percentage by just growing that category, like you suggest. I mean, is that sort of on the right track of what you're thinking?
I think you've really honed in on because I think the core insight there is that in any kind of restaurant, if you've had some success, I would encourage you, if you have the data, kind of rank order customers high to low and see who spends the most and who comes in the most and who doesn't, right? And if you don't have the data, just do it anecdotally or just with your own eyes, right? When I've talked to restaurants and franchisees, like, they know this stuff, right? Either through the data or they know them personally. And what I would do is corner those people and say, can I buy you a free meal or a free drink or whatever? And say, help me understand your origin story. And so if you think about, like, treat it like you're Disney and Marvel, right? And, they've made bazillions of dollars on telling the origin story of all these superheroes. And in the same vein, people who are super consumers, they're not born that way. They evolve to become that way over a series of life events and triggering things that occur that allow them to kind of flower into this kind of behavior. And the real thing, it's not flyers that are bombarded into a new 1 mile radius as you're describing. Is what you're trying to get is the people who are disproportionately valuable to your franchise today. How did they become disproportionately valuable? And almost like you're filming a documentary is kind of what I say, is like, start from the beginning and tell me, like, when did you first interact with not just my restaurant, but the category? When did you first start? When did you become a little bit more engaged? And at what point, what tipped you over into, I come here every day, or I come here so frequently, and I'm an evangelist for a category in your restaurant. I'm bringing people into it. And in that story, what I guarantee you is a story of life change. And I know that sounds a little extreme, but super consumers, they spend money in a crazy amount because they get crazy value from what you're doing. So if you can figure out what that story is, and then the next part is, where else might this story resonate, right? So there's a concept called sympathetic vibration. So I played the viola growing up, and what's fascinating is that if you take a viola and you play A at 440 hertz, and you have a piano all the way across the room, and you look at the A string, it'll vibrate, even though you're not touching it, but because it's the same frequency and it's resonating to the same tune that's there. And that's the whole premise of super consumers. Is you look at your restaurant, find your supers, find their origin story. And when you tell that origin story, it'll resonate with people all the way that you never had expected before, but in a way that makes sense given what the story is. And that's where you should go next, because to your point, you just need to win those few, that 10%, because they will be the ones who drag the other 90 to your store. And oftentimes when you're trying to do it the other way of, like, I'm here, come and find me. And, people don't listen to businesses. They listen to their friends and people they respect and know who are knowledgeable about this.
Oh, I love that. That's a great point. My wife and I, we have a favorite restaurant that we go to, and it's not even close to us. I mean, in fact, it's like 45 minutes away from us, but we go there probably once a quarter, probably 4 or 5 times a year. And we know all the staff. It's just like place in the middle of nowhere. It's a destination place. But what's interesting is, as I'm listening to you and talking with you, and then I think back, Now, when we go, a lot of times we are bringing other people. Sometimes it's she and I, my wife and I always go on our anniversary. So we spend our anniversary there, just us. But almost every other time we go, we bring other people. I do sometimes office parties there. And yes, the food is wonderful, but it's the people are great. We know the owner. You feel comfortable going in there. And yet I'm bringing and opening up opportunities for them with a whole subset of people who are probably further away than I am into that experience. But it's because I've become a super consumer for them. And I think it's a really, really smart way to think about it, because if you can do as a business, as a franchise, what other people really aren't doing, you can really, really accelerate your growth. I mean, everybody's doing the spam the people within a mile radius, all those sorts of things. Think about the things where you can grow those categories and grow and your super consumers, and it may not be right. It may not be the same thing that everybody else is doing. And in fact, you hope that it isn't really. I mean, I just think that's a really, I honestly have never heard that take on it. I mean, I think it's really, really interesting and makes so much sense. And doing it through the stories, because like you said, is people relate to the stories and people go where their friends go. They don't just go because you're a business. I went to a barbecue place this weekend, another totally out of the way for us. I mean, this is, there's 4 barbecue places I could have gone to, but I thought, I'm going to go to this place it's called Big Hoffa's, HOFFA''S. And I mean, I don't do work with them or anything. I just heard from 3 people who I trust, and they said, "Oh, you got to go check out this place." So I go and check it out, and my wife and I had an amazing meal there. So then before we left, we brought extra home for my kids. We brought extra home for my parents, extra home for my in-laws. But it's that whole idea of, I wasn't going just because they were a barbecue place. I was going because I had several people tell me, "Hey, you got to go check out that place."
Yeah, and what I love about the story and the story that you told beforehand is that it's, you can see the growth of things like Yelp, which it's a double-edged sword, but they're aggregating people's stories, and that what I've long kind of said is that these review sites are, the ratings themselves are not as helpful as the actual stories behind them, the context behind it, right? And that these review sites are never going to be as good as they could be until they find a way to analyze the stories and make that data more evident to it. Because right now, when I read these stories, so I'm Korean. If I'm in a city and I'm looking for a new Korean restaurant, like, this is going to sound a little controversial, but like I would prefer if Yelp would divide the stories into people who, I won't say race, but eat a lot of Korean food or don't eat a lot of Korean food and stuff. Right?
Yeah, exactly. People who know what they're talking about, right?
Exactly, right. Because there's something about the quality of the story, the credibility behind the story, and then I think that the nuance of what the 2 stories you told, I think, are perfect anecdotes of, if you hear it told 3 times from 3 credible people, you're gonna go, and your ability to aggregate those stories and to kind of amplify them a little bit that people are already telling. That's the magic of marketing that you need, not creating some other flyer that you want. But then the first story that you told about the place that you go to on your anniversary 4 to 5 times a year, if you're the owner of the restaurant, they probably know you, Josh, and they probably haven't thought about it, but they said, you know what? Next time you bring a friend, their meal's on me, or an extra bottle of wine when you bring a friend. And because there's one thing to be told the story, and it's another thing to be included as part of the story when, Josh, you invite somebody out and you are sharing not just the food, but the relationships that you've built. And because, I could show up to that place and I'd enjoy the food, but not have the same experience and ambiance because of the nature of the fact that you are their super consumer, and they realize that those 2 things of supers inviting friends, people should encourage that all over the place. And to your point about like, where should you launch a new franchise, is like, place that you drive 45 minutes to is like, they should do different things. Hey, Josh, if you come, in February, and if you invite a friend from the area, I'll throw in another bottle of wine or something else. That's a freebie there to you, right? Because it's the whole thing of like, people who love you want to see you win and succeed. And if you're thoughtful about why, and you understand their story, that eventually you can be part of it by entering into it. And that's how you're going to grow.
And I can replay it. I mean, I can't tell you the number of times. I mean, when we take people to this place, Bongi's Tavern is what it's called, and it's in this small town called Perkinsville, Indiana. I mean, there's like nothing there, but I tell their whole story to the people who we're bringing out there, usually in the car ride out there, because we're like, it's kind of hard to find. Just we'll pick you up, and so it's that whole thing of like, I'm now not only taking them to this place, but because I know their story, because I bought into it, I'm now repeating that story to others to spread it. So really interesting stuff. Really interesting. Eddie, you've been great to have on the show. I really, really appreciate it. People can connect with you, I believe, at EDDIEWOULDGROW.net, and then also through your website, EDDIEWOULDGROW.net. And really, it's been eye-opening to have this conversation because, I've talked with a lot of people about growth and growth strategies, and the way that you approach it, I just think is really insightful and different in a good way. So I appreciate that, and I appreciate you taking the time to come on.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure, and thanks a bunch for having me on, Josh.
Thanks for being with us today on the Franchise Euphoria podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to go to iTunes and provide a review. Also, please remember that although Josh Brown is a licensed and practicing attorney, nothing contained in this podcast should be construed as legal advice, because it is not. The information contained in this podcast is general and educational in nature, and none of it should be relied upon as legal advice. That being said, if you have questions for Josh and would like to contact him, please email him at josh@franchiseeuphoria.com. Thank you so much for listening, and we hope you tune in to our next weekly episode.